Hi, I'm doing another fairy tale discussion because my last one was such a massive hit. This time I'm going to be exploring the topic, has fairy tale decreased in quality, and if so, when did the rot start to seep in? At what point did the series start to go downhill? Now you might be one of those people who think that fairy tale is, and always has been, the greatest manga of all time. It can do no wrong. Basically, Hiro Mashima could publish 20 blank pages and you still regard it as a good chapter, because there are people like that. I've seen comments on YouTube where people have said that Fairy Tail has a more original, emotional, serious and complex plot than any other anime ever made. You might be one of those people who has always thought Fairy Tail is shit and just write it off as a One Piece ripoff or something. Me personally, Fairy Tail is still my second favourite series despite all its problems. I think a true fan is someone who can recognise when a series they like has problems and is able to admit that they enjoy it regardless. I'll be honest, I enjoy the Fairy Tail anime now more than the manga. I used to think Fairy Tail was an incredible series, and I still think highly of the first 200 to 300 chapters, give or take. I find it is always very difficult to determine at what point a series' quality started to decline, as there are always so many varying and conflicting opinions within the fanbase. Your favourite arc is going to be someone else's most hated arc, and vice versa, but the common consensus regarding Fairy Tail, at least from what I've seen, is that Tower of Heaven is considered the best arc in the series, and I can understand why, because it's my favourite too. In many ways, that was when Fairy Tail peaked in quality. I said in my last video that Fairy Tail had a lot of promise and potential at the start, and it did. It just didn't deliver on those promises. Fairy Tail is like a politician. It got everyone behind it when it was just starting out, but then it took its fame and support for granted and just started phoning it in somewhere along the line. It had the potential to be as good as One Piece, and it built up and built up to the Tower of Heaven arc, which had a fantastic payoff, character development and emotion, as well as iconic moments. One thing I think One Piece does extremely well are iconic moments and imagery, and I know some people don't like to see One Piece and Fairy Tail compared so much, but I like to do it, so tough. The Tower of Heaven arc had plenty of iconic moments for the series, such as Urza's backstory, Simon's death, Urza seeing her own funeral, and Natsu carrying Urza out of the Aetherion. Fairy Tail really did peak with chapter 100, the final chapter of the Tower of Heaven arc. That's not to say what came next was bad, and I think the next three arcs, the Fighting Festival arc, Oración Seis and Edolas, are all very good, especially Oración Seis, but none of them upped their game from the Tower of Heaven. They didn't take the next step, so to speak, in terms of storytelling. If Tower of Heaven was to Fairy Tail what Arlong Park was to One Piece, then Fairy Tail should have had a natural progression into an arc as good as Alabasta, but it didn't. It just stayed along the same tracks, never willing to take too many risks and always letting the heroes win. The series quality didn't exactly dip, but it didn't improve either, and 100 chapters is a little too early for a long-running shonen series to peak in quality. And then we get to the Tenro Island arc. This is an arc which I've found people have extremely mixed feelings about. It's a very Marmite arc, and for those of you who don't know what Marmite is, here's a brief description. You either love it or you hate it, and I'm one of the percentage which thinks it's okay. One thing I've always liked about One Piece, and to a certain extent Naruto, is that they prioritise story and characters over fighting. That's why I'm not into Bleach. Fairy Tail did that up until the Edolas arc. I was more invested in finding out the truth about Happy and Carla's origins and rescuing the guild than I was in seeing Urza versus Urza, not that it wasn't epic all the same. When Tenro Island started, I was extremely invested in Zeref and Kanna's secret, but by that point I was reading Fairy Tail once a week. It felt like it was just fighting on this island week after week, with no overarching structure or anything to connect these battles. It was also the first Fairy Tail arc to be over 30 chapters. I remember before Tenro Island people used to say,
Fairy Tail's better than One Piece because the arcs don't drag on forever.
You can't say that anymore. Plus, an average chapter of Fairy Tail has less than half the amount of content and story progression than an average One Piece chapter. Anyway, when the Tenro Island arc came to its conclusion, I was able to look back in retrospect and think that, even though it had more emphasis on shonen battles than any previous arc, it was still very good on the whole. I really liked the reveal of Kanna being Gildart's daughter. I felt Urza's fight with Azuma brought some much needed closure to the ongoing Urza Jalal subplot, before Mashima decided to bring it back and put it on life support. I had been dying to see Ultia's backstory ever since Galuna Island, and it did not disappoint. And the end, when Acnologia showed up and destroyed the island, is probably my second favourite moment in the entire series. I know a lot of people point to Natsu defeating Hades as one of the worst moments in the series, but it didn't bother me as much as it bothered most people. They were only able to defeat Hades because A, the Fairy Tail wizards can't die on Tenro Island and their magic power is exemplified. B, the source of Hades' power, his heart, was destroyed, which I know is cliché, but it's not as bad as them defeating him, thanks to a Nakama power-up, which is Machima's go-to cop-out these days. And C, it was 6 against 1 and they had Luxus, so. Plus, readers were so pissed about Fairy Tail owning Hades, it made their powerlessness in the face of Acnologia, an ultimate defeat, even more surprising and engaging, almost as if that was Mashima's intention. The confrontation with Acnologia wouldn't have worked if Fairy Tail wasn't in the midst of celebrating their victory over Grimoire Heart. So while I think that Tenro Island does represent the start of Fairy Tail's transition from an intriguing series with a lot of potential to a generic shonen with mostly lazy writing, overall I think it was still a very good arc. Then came the 7-year time skip. If there is one moment in Fairy Tail that I've seen people agree represents the downfall of the series, it is this. I've even told people to stop watching after the 7-year time skip. Obviously one moment, one bad, insane writing decision can't change the series straight away, but there have been so few good moments since then that you're probably better off pretending that everyone was killed by Acnologia and that the series ended there. This was back when, whenever something happened in Fairy Tail that I thought was stupid or strange, I used to think, I have faith that Mashima knows what he's doing. I still do that with One Piece all the time. I didn't think that when the time skip happened. I actually thought,
This is great, this is the best decision Hiramashima could have possibly made. This is exactly what the series needs. I'm sorry for Desmond after how this is somewhat disappointing defeat.
I felt like this would be the next step which Fairy Tail never took after Tear of Heaven, a chance for Fairy Tail to become a series which took itself more seriously and could be more respected in the manga community, with the characters coming back older and more mature. After Zeref's introduction into the series after being given so much build-up since the Lullaby arc, I thought this is exactly what Mashima was going for. But then Natsu and the others walked into the guild having not aged a day, and I tried to tell myself, I have faith that Mashima knows what he's doing. So I began to look at it from an alternative point of view. Fairy Tail always wins, that's one of the main gripes people have with the series. So Mashima made Fairy Tail fall 7 years behind the rest of the world. Now they're the weakest guild in Fiore, desperately trying to play catch up. Most manga have time skips after a massive loss so the characters can catch up and hold their own against new, stronger opponents. Fairy Tail was already the strongest, so Hiramashima did the opposite. Makes sense. It's an interesting subversion of a long-standing shonen trope. That's what I told myself. So I thought, let's see where he goes with this. The answer is nowhere. Fairy Tail is still the strongest, even with a 7-year head start. Lamia Scale, Blue Pegasus and Sabretooth are still getting dominated by them in the atrocious Grand Magic Games arc, just because Fairy Tail has friendship and the pair of emotions on their side, as if all the other guilds didn't get the memo that friendship is magic. It's pure lazy writing and makes the time skip completely pointless. A few instances of Fairy Tail being portrayed as weak at the start of the Grand Magic Games does not warrant their absolute domination of it throughout the majority of the games, with the exception of Lucy obviously, because there has to be one damsel in distress. Why did you even have the time skip? Not only has it served very little purpose, but it created numerous plot holes, such as Zeref, Raventail and Tartarus not doing anything to take advantage of the fact that Fairy Tail isn't around to stop them if they were to put their evil plans into action. It seems like in the 7 years Fairy Tail was gone, the world became an extremely dull place, just twiddling its thumbs waiting for them to return before anything happened. Speaking of plot holes, I was thinking about doing an entire video on the amount of plot holes in the Grand Magic Games arc thanks to the ridiculous time travel subplot. Oda can handle arcs with dozens and dozens of subplots and characters and is able to bring it together so it all makes sense and isn't just one giant clusterfuck. While I'm not saying Hiramashima isn't capable of this if he were to put the effort in, he definitely wasn't successful with the Grand Magic Games arc. Everything about the Grand Magic Games arc, from the time skip to the mystery with Eclipse and the numerous other subplots, just go to prove that it was way too ambitious for its own good and just ended up being a convoluted mess. I have most of the Fairy Tail manga volumes. And in Hiramashima's notes at the end, he reveals that he doesn't always plan things ahead, and that sometimes he doesn't know what next week's chapter is even going to be about. He was at least able to hide that well up until the Grand Magic Games arc. I think he made the entire thing up as he went along. And what's worse is that we're still feeling the repercussions. Sting and Rogue are still hanging around like a bad smell after all, not to mention everything that happened with Minerva. Hiramashima tried to turn her into a recurring villain, but failed spectacularly. I'm not saying Fairy Tail hasn't had its share of good moments since the time skip, but they're few and far between and often outweighed by the terrible ones. Hiramashima is great at setting up arcs, but they usually have a disappointing payoff. So it's best not to get your hopes up, otherwise you're in for a fall. The Tartarus arc had amazing setup and it felt like Fairy Tail was back, but Mashima over-egged it with way too many friendship speeches, ass pulls and just plain stupid cringeworthy moments. I have mixed feelings about the reveal that Igneel was inside Natsu and its ultimate death. I understand that it, and the arc in general, was meant to be a defining moment of the series, but I feel it could have and should have been handled and executed with a lot more care, skill and tact. Hiramashima just seems to be unable to live up to the expectations he creates when he hypes up an arc during its initial stages. It's the same with villains such as Sabretooth and Tartarus. They have each proved to be fairly disappointing in the end, and since the second 1 year time skip, Fairy Tail seems to have hit a new low. The last dozens of chapters have been so bad that they've actually made me appreciate the Grand Magic Games and Tartarus arcs, which is really saying something. But one character that I think has suffered the most from the series drop in quality, and represents everything that's wrong with modern fairy tale, is Urza Scarlet. I won't go into detail now because I plan to make a separate video on that topic. I've decided to break this topic down across 4 separate videos because I'm that anal about this. I've pinpointed 5 key problematic issues that are prevalent in modern fairy tale, and I'll be discussing them in my next video. I then plan to follow up on that video with a video where I'll list what are, in my opinion, the 10 worst moments in fairy tale since the 7-year time skip. And finally I'll do a video dedicated to discussing Urza in depth and the ultimate destruction of her character. So until then, bye.